Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be demonstrating how I make Korean kimchi, and I'm going to be making it with Napa cabbage. I'm going to begin by quartering the cabbage. First, I make an incision towards the bottom, and then I shred the rest with my hands. And I try to be gentle on this part so as not to shred too much. Then I will make another incision and shred that half. And then finishing up with the other half, I'm making an incision and shredding that until the entire head of cabbage is in 4 equal size pieces. I'm just finishing up the second head of cabbage. Today I have 3 heads of Napa cabbage total. And you can do as many as you like. Just adjust the recipe accordingly. And try to make sure the pieces are all equal size. There you go. Now, on to the next step. The next step, we need to rinse all of the cabbage for 2 reasons. One reason is that we want it to be clean, and the second reason is that we are going to salt the cabbage, and the water will help the salt to stick. So make sure the water is down in between each of the leaves and all over the tops and the bottoms. Continue this process until all of the cabbage has been rinsed. Then what you need is some coarse salt. Kosher salt will work. I used coarse sea salt because that's what I had on hand. I'm going to be sprinkling the salt in between each leaf And what this does is it helps draw out moisture from the cabbage so that it will wilt. And this helps the kimchi process. You don't need a large amount. Just sprinkle a little bit of salt on each leaf. And because we rinsed the cabbage with water, the salt will stick. Continue salting every cabbage until they are all salted. Then you'll have to leave them covered and salted for up to 4 hours. I usually do around 3 or 4 hours. You want the cabbage to be nice and wilted before you use it to make the kimchi. Finishing up the salting process. If you use a little too much salt, don't worry about it, because we'll actually be rinsing it off a little bit later. So we'll be okay. Very important to not skip this step when you're making your kimchi. It takes a little bit more time, but it's a very important step in the process. I put a lid on and let it sit for 3 or 4 hours. You can see in 1 hour how much it has wilted already. What I'm going to be doing is turning over each piece of cabbage so that Each side will be able to drain its water equally. You'll want to do this every hour that you're letting it wilt. You can see the water at the bottom that has already been extracted from the cabbage. For the next process, you're going to need For the next process, you're going to need 2 cups of water, and you're going to be putting it over medium heat. Then you'll need 2 tablespoons of sweet rice flour. If you don't have sweet rice flour, then tapioca starch or even cornstarch will be a good substitute, but sweet rice flour works the best for this recipe. Stir until dissolved. I had to get a whisk because the wooden spoon was not breaking up the lumps. So you want all the lumps to be broken up, and then you'll turn the heat up. Going to add 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. If you don't have brown sugar, regular sugar or coconut sugar will work. I just like the flavor the brown sugar adds. You're going to let the liquids come up to a simmer. And you can see that the mixture has thickened up. Next, you're going to need a food processor, and you're going to add half a cup of garlic, 1 teaspoon of ginger, and 1 onion. I like to use white or yellow onion for this. And because my food processor is small, I had to do this in 2 batches. But if you can fit it into your food processor, then you can do it in 1 batch. Now I'm adding half a cup of fish sauce. Most grocery stores sell this nowadays in the Asian aisle. And I'm going to process that until it forms a paste. This may take a couple of minutes. Now I'm going to do the rest of the onion. And I'm going to be adding half a cup of salted fermented shrimp. They're basically very small, teeny tiny little shrimp. And I'm going to be not draining them. They come in a sort of brining liquid. I'm going to be adding the liquid as well. You can make the kimchi without adding these shrimp, but they do add a very unique flavor to the kimchi, so I like to add them. But I realize they're not always available. Now you're going to add the mixture to the liquids from the stove. Your stove should be off. Just making sure to get every last bit out of the food processor. Giving it a stir. You can see the consistency, and that is about what it's supposed to be. Now to add the red pepper flakes you need to use Korean red pepper flakes because cayenne pepper will be much too hot. I started out adding 1 cup of the flakes to the mixture because I'm making one batch mild and then the rest of the batches are going to be spicy. So after I make the one batch, I'm going to add another cup of the hot pepper flakes so that it will be spicy. Here's the Korean radish. You're going to need to peel it and then chop it into very thin matchsticks. Korean radish is very sweet and not very spicy. And since the kimchi is so spicy, the radish adds a nice flavor to it. If you can't find Korean radish, just feel free to leave it out. Now I'm just chopping the radish into very thin matchsticks to add to the kimchi. I'm just transferring the radish to a plate so that I can add it to the kimchi mixture later. The Korean radish can be found at most Asian markets. But as I mentioned before, if you can't get a hold of it, then feel free to leave it out. I'm just finishing up chopping the radish. Want to make sure each piece is nice and thin. Now I've got 1 carrot And I'm going to chop it in the same way. Very thin matchsticks. You could also leave out the carrot, but I really like the way it looks and tastes in the kimchi. So I do not peel my carrots before I use them. I don't find it necessary. Plus, the peel has lots of good nutrients, so I usually leave the peel on. Making sure each piece is nice and thin. Now I like lots of green onion in my kimchi. But as with the other vegetables, it's up to you. I'm using about 10 strands of green onion. Also cut very thin. And if you don't want to use that many, you don't have to. But for me, the green onion is my favorite part of the kimchi, so I use a lot of it. For kimchi, I usually like to cut the whites off the green onion and use only the green parts. Once the kimchi fermentation process has begun, all of these vegetables that we're adding will become soft. Now, after the cabbage has set for 3 to 4 hours, I'm going to drain the salted water And then rinse each piece of cabbage, making sure to rinse off all the excess salt. Otherwise, you will have very, very salty kimchi, which is not necessarily what you want. You can see how soft the leaves have gotten. Just continuing to rinse, getting in between each leaf, and then squeezing and shaking the leaves dry. I'm using room temperature water. You don't want your water to be too hot or too cold. So room temperature water is best. Now for making kimchi, I recommend wearing a pair of gloves because the capsaicin that's in the hot pepper flakes can linger onto your skin and burn, especially if you're making your batch very spicy. Right now I'm mixing in all the liquid ingredients with the vegetables that we've chopped, such as the radish, carrots, and the green onion. And once those are all coated and mixed in equally, we will begin making the kimchi. The first batch I'm making is mild, and then after that I'll be adding another cup of the red pepper flakes to the mixture. Just place some of the mixture in between each leaf. Make sure each leaf is well coated. Doesn't need to be perfect, but you do need to place the mixture in between each of the leaves. Then I'll be placing the cabbage into a plastic container where it will sit throughout the fermentation process. You can also use a traditional fermentation pot to do this. I would not recommend using a glass jar because during fermentation you'll have different gases that come out of the cabbage, and they can expand, and in some cases they can break the glass jar. So I prefer to use a plastic container. And then after the initial fermentation process, you can transfer it to a glass jar to put in the refrigerator. You will want to put in as much cabbage as will fit in the container, but you do not want it to be stuffed completely to the top. Push down on the cabbage, and that is what it should look like. I put the lid on relatively loosely and let it sit for at least 3 days. If you like yours very sour, you can let it sit longer. When the kimchi is finished, after 3 days, you should see gas bubbles when you squeeze it, and then you'll know it's ready to go into the refrigerator. Thank you for watching.